Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go around is Catherine King. So I've found Catherine via her work as a sign language interpreter for some of the biggest European comedians out there, and in particular, a bit where she was signing crazy phrases with like various accent. It's definitely worth a watch. Look down below. I'll put a link in there for you so you can see it for yourself. Anyway, I learned that interpreters guess what comes next and don't necessarily translate kind of word for word, but work to convey the feeling or intention of the message. I also found an incredibly kind, warm, and empathetic person who is working to make room for themselves, even when the voices in their head tells them not to, right? I'm sure nobody can relate to that. Anyway, if you enjoy this episode, please share with a friend, and I hope you enjoy this chat with Catherine.
I'm not someone who does a lot of this kind of talking. Interpreters don't tend to talk. You know, we tend to talk for other people. We tend not to have a voice all at the time, so it's quite weird. It's quite weird to do this.
Do you, and I've, you know, I'm not saying there's anything good or bad because I don't have one. Do you have an inner monologue? Like, do you hear your own voice in your head?
I hear lots of different. I was going to say I hear lots of voices, but maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
maybe not publicly say that. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and include this, but I'm going to do the intro. So, Catherine, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you let a little bit of the cat out of the bag there. You normally what I say is, so you know, it is so funny. Like I was out a couple of days ago. I sat down next to someone, and I said, "So who are you?" You know, I love just asking somebody that, and it always takes people back. So, Catherine, who are you?
Scottish.
I'm Scottish.
Yeah, I'm Scottish. So, the accent might throw everybody. Scottish.
Well, I was thinking Jersey, New Jersey, New York, but Scottish, that makes sense. Yeah.
New York. No, I can't. Never do the American accent. I can't.
I think you just did it. Don't say never.
I think I sound like someone, like a really, like a B-list actor who used to be on Law and Order, you know, when I try and do it. Like, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. Scottish, and I'm an interpreter. That's my job. I'm an interpreter, and I work with English and British Sign Language.
I didn't realize there was a difference between English and British Sign Language.
So English language, spoken language, and written language, and my other half of my language combination is British Sign Language, as opposed to American Sign Language or any other sign language around the world. I'm not proficient in those sign languages. In BSL, I am.
That makes absolute sense. Like, well, I don't know why in my brain it never registered that, you know, what do they say? We're like two countries separated by a common language or something like that. You know, like there are differences. So ASL and BSL, two different things, huh?
Totally different. Yeah. It just from English has all this sort of Anglo-Saxon and Latin and Greek in spoken language, you know. So British Sign Language developed within the British Isles, within the United Kingdom. And then it sort of exported itself to places like Australia and New Zealand when it colonised. So you can kind of track the colonial patterns of where the kids are signing BSL in the middle of Africa. It's because of colonial practices, stealing land, stealing people. America, interestingly, you guys can track your language back through Ireland to France. So you kind of skip over the mainland Britain, you skip over Scotland and England into France. Because I think the story is that the earlier, I can't do the history of it. I really don't want to do the history of it. But the people who were in France who were signing and using sign as an educational tool for very academic and highly trained deaf people who were teachers themselves came to Britain to say, "What are you guys doing?" And typical of Britain, we went, "No, don't want any of your kind. Nope. Off you go, off you pop." And they popped over to America. So you guys can trace your language back all the way through Ireland to France.
Oh my gosh. I don't know that you should be telling too many Americans about our French heritage as far as that goes.
Yeah.
It seems like we have some beef there.
Yeah. Well, apparently so does Britain, but who knew that? Not in Scotland. We have zero beef with the French in Scotland. We have animals. an old kind of, what do they call it, the entente cordiale with the French. But England doesn't seem to like France very much. But that's not a Scottish thing at all.
Yeah, the way you guys operate over there is so bizarre to me. It's because you've got the United Kingdom, but it's like actually like 4 different countries, right? And and then you guys, I guess like colonialism. You don't necessarily consider yourselves British. I have an Irish friend, and I love to call him British, and he absolutely hates it. Like he does not want to be associated with that. So it's such a interesting relationship you guys have over there.
Well, with your friend, I think that's a little bit worse because it depends on whereabouts on the island he lives.
Yeah.
That's a bit, if he's up in the north and he is British, if he's down in the south, then he's a completely different country. He's in the Republic of Ireland, it's totally different. They're independent. But the whole independence thing is kicking back off in Scotland again. It's been around a lot lately. It's a very hot thing up here, and there is a lot of support for it. We're just a bit different to England. Our culture is just a bit different. We think differently. Not better, just different. It's just different. It's not about people. It's not about Scots and English people. It's about governing systems. We're not a big. Well, I'm not a big fan of the current Westminster government that we have in the UK. I'd quite like to see that stop because it's deeply inhumane, and so probably not a great idea to go further into politics because I will start ranting.
Yeah. Hey, I always love a good rant. I'm not going to say no to a good rant every now. But I have noticed there is a lot of momentum building kind of in your geopolitical climate of separating, kind of pulling back from the monarchy, the old ways of doing things. And, that whole just because this is how we've been doing it the last 200 years doesn't mean we need to keep doing it this way.
Exactly. And I think I don't know where you guys are at, but the cost of living in Britain has just soared. Energy prices are extraordinary at the moment over here. Doubling, your bill is doubling. What you're paying for your energy costs, your gas and electricity. Petrol, I think you call it gas, don't you, for your car? Extraordinary price per litre at the moment. And just the gap between those who do have the sort of the 1% and their hangers-oners and the rest of us is just widening and widening. And so to see, for me, this is a very personal thing, but to see £250 million spent on something that's so outdated feels almost insulting now to do that to people. When we have higher rates of poverty now in this country than I think the last time we were like this was the 1930s. So it's just awful at the moment. I've been hearing about like food shortages too, right? Like especially like on kind of mainland Britain or whatever. That's so wild. Like the idea of I heard some people saying like, we're having to go to food banks occasionally, to make ends meet, and then you're gonna spend $250 million on a coronation. Yeah. And our National Health Service, which is absolutely precious and needs to be protected. I would be bankrupt if I lived in America. I genuinely would. I would be bankrupt. I have migraine, and I have MS, and just the MS medication in itself, I'd have to sell my house if I lived in a country that didn't have a National Health Service. But I live here, and I get this precious support from me. This totally different. It's the difference between being able to work and not being able to work, being able to be with my family and not being able to be with my family, and we have to protect it, but it's being systematically defunded and underfunded, probably I think in the hope that at the end the government of today will be able to say, oh look, it's not fit for purpose, we should close this down and go private. And I think that's the trajectory we're on, which is one of the reasons I think the independence movement in Scotland and weirdly in Wales as well has started to blossom. Wales are actually having a kind of an independence movement growth as well over the past 5 years. Yeah. It's really interesting to watch all of us kind of pull back from England and go, guys, if you keep voting this kind of government in, we just want a little bit of distance. So it's all a bit odd over here just now, and the whole rhetoric around race and immigration is quite brutal at the moment. Yeah.
It seems like ever since Brexit, you guys have been kind of because, Brexit and then COVID happened, right? The pandemic, and then just everything. The Ukraine war kicked off. It's just, everything's been wild for you guys over there.
It has, yeah. And the blaming everything on the war in Ukraine is becoming like a hobby for the government, the UK government. Food shortages, that's because of Ukraine. They're like, what? What are we importing from Ukraine? Why is there I can't get any bread because there's a war in Ukraine? What? It's Brexit. It's because we can't import the way we used to. We used to have a sustainable free market. And then now instead of a free market, we have an 8-hour queue of lorries at the port in the south trying to get over from France, just this great big long queue of 6, 7, 8 hours for people to get into Britain or out of Britain. It's just extraordinary.
That's wild.
But the government kind of line on that publicly is, no, it's not Brexit. It's just it's the post-pandemic issues and it's Ukraine and, so there's a lot of double talk or double think. Is that it? George Orwell's double think, double talk, double think. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
I heard something to the effect of there was some conditions that led to lower crops this year or something like that. But then due to Brexit, normally people would just import things in, and now that Brexit's there, these importers could say, well, I could go to all these countries that are super easy to send that stuff to. There's not additional tariffs or anything like that. Or I could go through the process of having to try and get it. And so it's they're going to take the path of least resistance. Because who wouldn't, right?
Exactly. That's and add to that a 7-hour queue or a 6-hour queue.
Yeah.
The biggest problem last summer, I think it was migrant workers. We couldn't get migrant workers because this government is so hostile to migrants. We couldn't get enough people because this whole thing about stop immigration because there's not enough work for the people who actually live here. The people who live here don't want to be picking raspberries and strawberries and potatoes. We don't want to be doing that. It's the migrant workers who come over who are the backbone of that part of our economy, and probably underpaid and should be paid way better. But they're the backbone of our economy in that way. And it also really hurt the NHS as well, the National Health Service, because a lot of our nurses and doctors come from overseas, and so they either had to leave or had to pay extraordinary fees just to be allowed to stay on visas. And so people had to make a decision: should I pay to stay here in a country that's hostile to me, or should I go to places that want me? And so a lot of people left, and we lost a lot of staff. And good choice, Brexit. Good choice. Scotland did.
Everybody's allowed to make mistakes, right?
It's quite a big mistake. It's billions of pounds. It's quite a big one.
Yeah. I always thought that was interesting. I've always kind of looked to, say, Australia or you guys, where something will happen and you guys will actually make affecting changes. You'll create some laws that actually really affect and change things. And over here in the U.S., it's we never do anything. Nothing ever gets done. But then I've heard that it's also a positive. That's why the U.S. economy is kind of mostly stable, because we can't decide to change anything, right? So nothing ever gets done.
Huge. That's because you guys are huge, 50 countries essentially, all hanging together with different cultures and languages and belief systems. I look at America and think, how is that possible? Just how is that a possibility? Because we're so tiny, we're so small, we're a dot on the map, and we still want to break that into further dots. We're splitting the atom over here. You guys are 50 states, it's 50, isn't it? Am I right? It's 50?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I need that before
Nailed it. All right, now I'm going to need to hear all the state capitals in order, alphabetically.
No.
But you earlier, you were talking about how Scottish people, you feel different, you act different, you think different, all that stuff, and it's very much the same here. It's just there's not hard divisions. I mean, it's probably not necessarily a hard division for you. It kind of feels like to me where you have a big canvas. There's the United States, right? And I take all these different colors of paint and I kind of just drip them on it, so it sort of smears and blends. And as you sort of move, you can feel the shift and difference. But for us too, a lot of it is as you move into a city, it's got a big city, it's got a definite feel, and then as you move kind of into the rural areas, it's got a completely different feel. I'm sure it's very similar for you guys, right?
Yeah. Glasgow is a very urban city. It's and it's small. I mean, it's a really small city compared to you guys. You know, you probably have towns bigger than Glasgow. But that's what my nearest big city is, Glasgow, and it has a definite feel to it. You know, it is quite gritty, and but it's beautiful, and I love Glasgow to bits. And then you have on the east coast of Scotland, you've got Edinburgh, which is our capital, and it's almost sort of picture postcard pretty. You know, Glasgow's not that. It's different. It's different, beautiful. Edinburgh's got all this incredible architecture and history, and whereas Glasgow's a bit of a newer place. It comes up through the Industrial Revolution, and then in the 19th century. It's a very old place, but the city feel to it comes up in the 19th century, whereas Edinburgh is ancient. You know, it's really old. And you can feel that if you've ever been over to Edinburgh, like for the Edinburgh Festival or something, you can feel it as you're walking through these cobbled streets. You can imagine 300, 400, 500 years ago or more. You know, you can imagine it. But we always say we're quite different people. Glasgow and Edinburgh, we're quite different. I tend to be a bit more on the West Coast. I wasn't born in Glasgow, I was born kind of near, but we talk a lot faster in Glasgow and in the West. Edinburgh's a little bit slower, a bit more measured. Yeah, so it's a bit different. It's just a little bit different. You should come and see it. Scotland's gorgeous. Come and see it.
I would love to. I've heard nothing but good things. I love British television, British media. I watch a ton of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like the things I like and enjoy sort of align more with that side of the ocean, I think, in general.
Come and see us. Come and see us in the Edinburgh Festival. Come over.
Is Edinburgh, is that the big comedy festival do you guys have?
There are multiple festivals that run in Edinburgh at the same time. There's the International Festival, which is a bit of a big deal. It's a big, huge piece of work, and it attracts big, famous actors who come over, like Alan Cumming will come and do a one-man Hamlet or something like that. You know, these great big pieces of work. I tend not to. I work sometimes for the International Festival, and they're good people. Yeah. And then there's the Fringe, which was set up as a kind of alternative to the International Festival years and years and years ago. And the Fringe itself has now become this big institution. It's become this big kind of solid institution. And so now we've got the Free Fringe, which is this little tiny renegade, plucky kind of fringe, which is shot off from there, but from that which is cool as well. Which probably feels a bit more like the 1960s Fringe, you know, of people just kind of on a shoestring doing shows. And the Comedy Festival sits within that. Yeah. It's cool. So Comedy Festival, big and huge and bamboozlingly plural. It's hundreds of people, hundreds of shows.
Well, I hear most of my favorite comedians over there end up talking about it. Like, Ed Gamble, you've got Jimmy Carr, which is sort of a divisive character because he's a bit of a dick, which is unique for you guys, which I think is really cool.
Wow. Okay.
He feels very American. That's why I associate with, and it's funny, like all of your depictions of Americans were loud and obnoxious and morons, and it always makes me cringe a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
No. I mean, it's not wholly inaccurate. It's just kind of a hyper-realized version of us.
Okay. There's something about an American accent that cuts through noise. I will say that. In a crowded room of Scots, an American accent will cut right through that like hot butter, like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah. I think, to the other side of, it cuts both ways. I think the Scottish accent over here is normally associated with Austin Powers, like characters from those movies, so. Yeah, I'm just saying. That's like...
Yeah. Uh-huh. I was waiting for drunk. I was waiting for that, because normally we're associated with drunk and loud and obnoxious, We can be associated with that, yeah.
No, or boisterous and friendly, and anytime anybody over here has a Scottish accent, you are instantly the coolest person in the room and everybody wants to be your friend. So
it's the opposite here. You're quite cool. If you've got an American accent, you're very cool over here. Yeah, that's what I mean. Your accent cuts through because the Scots are quite deferential. We don't particularly, this is my experience, we tend to sort of humble ourselves. We're in sight of an American or an English person, we tend to bend the knee and go, oh, well, they're clearly much cleverer than me. They're clearly far better than I am. So yeah, those accents cut through and we go, oh, shh, someone important's talking. That's what we do.
Yeah, or I guess all British people in American TV, they are either the villain, or they're an innocuous character that's just there for comedic relief or to move the story.
Yeah. The stupid upper class person. Yeah, you get you get that here as well, actually. The stupid upper class persons, the twit is quite often a thing here. It's interesting that you watch all this British TV. I consume American TV like it's M&M's. I just consume American TV. It's awful. It's the one thing that stops my brain from churning. You talked about the inner voice, the monologue that you hear. The only thing that stops my monologue relentlessly going, my inner monologue relentlessly going, is American TV. Usually really awful stuff like Law and Order.
I think it's a good classification. You basically said American TV makes your brain stop. And I think that's pretty accurate.
Well, yeah, but I was watching Succession today. I was catching up on Succession today, and the next episode of it, and it's an extraordinary piece of work. So America comes out with these extraordinary pieces of work as well. So it's not all that. I just tend to go low, I tend to go for this stuff that I don't want to think. I don't want to. I think it's an interpretive brain. We're always predicting what's coming next because that's part of the job. You're working simultaneously, so you're hearing something, you're processing language, you're creating a new packet of language, you're thinking about the cultural impact, then you produce it, but all the time you're listening for the next piece and the next piece. So you're on a conveyor belt of critical thinking all the time. And when that's done, I don't want to do that when I watch TV. So I want to watch something that it really doesn't matter if I haven't guessed who did it at the end. It'll be signposted. And then even if I go, oh, I didn't think he did it, that's all good. That's fine. I would have, But if I doze off in the middle of it, it doesn't matter. If I wake up, I'll catch up. That's what I need at night.
You open the door, so let's walk through it. It's fascinating, your process of doing sign language. So it almost sounds like your hands are on autopilot, whether the rest of your brain is kind of processing all this other stuff. Because I was just now imagining, like, whenever I'm typing something, like, I don't have to consciously think about where my fingers are going to meet the keys. They have gotten to where they know it after, doing it for 2 decades. Is that sort of how you operate?
I think after years and years of being an interpreter, there are certain things that come very easily. I would hesitate to say automatically because you can't really ever turn off in an interpreting situation. You're constantly, there's a very deep sort of attention, a very deep listening happening that's sort of beyond what. So, for example, if you're sitting listening to a presentation or a speech, you can phase in and out of that, and not really lose the thread. You can do that. An interpreter can't. They are very deeply listening for not just meaning, but themes and implications and predicting what might come next. There's always this kind of sense of predicting what might come next so that you're ready for it. You have about 3 or 4 seconds really between hearing something and working out how to translate it to then produce it. And that happens in a sort of I always think of Charlie Chaplin on the conveyor belt, in modern times, getting caught up in you can get mangled, you can car crash it and just go, I'm done, someone else take over. Yeah. And if you find yourself like Charlie, going round the wheels, then just get out and get someone else in.
So the way I found you was you are an interpreter for a lot of performance arts. And I found you through some comedy stuff. I think it was Adam Hill's comedy stuff, because he was getting you to do accents in sign language, which it broke my brain. Like the idea that you could do an accent in sign language, but it made me start thinking, like, you predict what comes next. I'm assuming their routine, at least a little bit of what they're going to say. Have you ever done like improv comedy where you quite literally have no idea what's going to come next? Is that like a unique challenge?
I haven't done sort of anything that's been tagged as improv, but a lot of comedians, if you think about Adam, for example, he'll have a section of stuff he knows he's going to say. And I'll see the show a couple of times just to see it, just to record it in my head and write it down, and then translate those bits. So those bits are translated and honed and should be produced around the same time as him, so the laugh happens at the same time, so there's no real delay. But he is known for not sticking to that at all, or parking that and going off into the audience and talking. And so you're just working on what you hear and hoping you get it right. And that's what he does with the accents. That one, maybe, I think the one I think you're thinking, you saw me on, that was probably spontaneous from him. You know, he loves language and he loves accent. And so it was one of the things we used to be often talked about, because we both love accents and language. And we had conversations about that, because the accent that you see me do is not how a deaf person of that nationality would cite. Do you know what I mean? I'm not, if he says be French and he does his French voice, I'm not being French deaf. I'm being a French hearing person, so that's the way people would see French deaf people, French hearing people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I'm sort of lampooning French hearing people by doing that, or any other language, you know, when he does his accents.
It's kind of like you're miming what that nationality would sort of do, right?
Yeah, there are certain sort of iconic ways that people talk, you know, and the kind of French shoulder is always a good one to throw in, because they do that. And they do that downward, you know. And I worked in a university in a school of languages, and had lots of colleagues at one point in my life who were French and Spanish and Italian and German, and you could see the traits when they went into their native language and were very relaxed. You could see that this would all come back, this whole thing would come back. It was always made me laugh, and the Spanish with their hands and the Italians with their hands. So there's certain little tropes that you can pick up. That's the best I can do for what he's doing on stage. You know, it's the best equivalent that I can think of to make people laugh. That's the best I can do.
No, that's fascinating. Like the body language. I think everybody's accustomed with like the Italian hands, but the idea that, like, I had never perceived that like Germans had specific body language, or French, like you're talking about the shoulder, and like.
Well,
I had no idea. But then also, I guess over here in the U.S., we're probably not introduced to as much of that as you guys are. It's highly unlikely I'm going to run into a French person today.
Really?
Yeah, or a German person. It's like they are such unique novelties when you hear somebody with a foreign accent. Like, for example, my friend Andrew from Australia came over here. People could not get enough of this dude. Like, strangers walking by would hear him talking to me, and he would get pulled over, like, into this conversation. And then I went over to Australia for his wedding, but they couldn't be less interested in me, my American accent. And you know what's so funny is people kept accusing me of being Canadian. And after, like, the 7th person, I was like, what makes you think I'm Canadian? They go, oh, well, you're so polite. I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, no,
they just assume all Americans are jerks, which I love. It's like, I don't mind being accused of being Canadian. They are such nice people. It's like, genuinely.
I've heard this, that there was an American comedian, and I can't remember his name, at the festival one year, who one of his bits was, and remember, Americans out there, when you're abroad, just tell people you're Canadian, and always got a laugh from the Americans, and everyone else would go, is there a difference? That's a very kind of British European thing. Is there a difference? It's taken me a while to hear the difference between a Canadian and an American accent. I can just about, certain things that they say, I can just about get it, but I often make that mistake. Same as Australian and New Zealand. I have to really listen to get the difference in those accents. Yeah, I don't always get it right.
Yeah, for sure. I always think of Rose Matafeo, when the way she says shed. Sheed?
Sheed.
Go to the sheet? Yeah. What? You doing where? What? Yeah, I love it.
It? A shed. I don't know. Now I can't say the word shed. Oh no. Move on.
It's lost all meaning.
It has.
But that's fun. So, like, I didn't realize there was so much more to communication. I guess it's imperceptible to most muggles. Like, the idea that you notice so much body language and other interesting aspects of conversation.
I do, because body language is separate from sign language. It's not the same thing. I think people have that myth that, one myth is that every sign language in the world is the same, and that's international, and that's not true. Every country has their own sign language, sometimes multiple sign languages. In Canada, actually, you have American Sign Language exists quite happily up there, but also langue de signe de Québécois exists up there as well. So you have Québécois Sign Language up there, which is different to French Sign Language, in the same way that Québécois is different to French. So that's quite an interesting one that sits together. And I think there are 2 sign languages existing in Belgium as well. There's Flemish Sign Language, and there's Oh no, I've forgotten now, but there's another sign language in there as well. Flemish and I don't know. It'll come back to me. I can't remember. But there's another sign language sitting in there because there's 2 languages as well, 2 cultures, 2 communities sitting there. In Scotland, we have British Sign Language. We have a very strong accent, I would say, in terms of the sign language we produce in Scotland. In fact, one of the first times I worked for Adam at a big gig in London, I went down to London with him, and I asked him to please tell the audience I was Scottish because I can't do it. I'm not going to speak on a stage. I wouldn't do that. That's an awful idea.
Is this problematic enough right here?
This is hard enough. Yeah, this is hard enough. I'm just pretending I'm talking to a friend. That's all. And I'm just talking to a new friend. I asked them to tell people that I was Scottish, not because it was a joke or it would give them a bit or anything, but because I wanted the audience, the deaf audience in particular, to understand that I was Scottish and that what I was signing came from Scotland, in case they kind of thought, what is she signing? I don't understand that bit, or that's not the right thing. I wanted them to know that it was dialect, that it was my dialect. And I did try to adjust and do much more of a London dialect, but there are certain things that, like you said about automatic, there are certain things that are automatic to me. So if someone talks about the days of the week, the Monday to Friday, those are on the hand in British, in Scottish variant of sign language. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's what we do. But in England, they don't do that. They do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They do that. And so for me, it's automatic. If someone said, "Oh, I saw him on Tuesday," I will always do Tuesday, and I have to force my hand not to do that, to do it another way. And, yeah. So there are certain bits of language that are in my body, that they just live in my body. And he did do it. He did tell people I was Scottish, and then he made a big joke of it because that's what comedians do. You should never speak to a comedian backstage, never, because it just becomes fodder.
Yeah, don't give them any ammunition. Right? It's like, what were you thinking?
Exactly. You only just stoke them, and then they go, "Oh, I take that," and they don't mean to. They absolutely don't mean to. I'm not saying anybody stole any jokes. They didn't steal any jokes. None of my jokes are good enough. No.
So I know there's some languages like Spanish and Portuguese, right? They're different, but you can kind of get the gist. Is that pretty common for some of the sign languages?
British Sign Language and Australian Sign Language have a lot of commonality because it came from Britain. It went over there. Right. It's kind of, the 2 languages have diverged now over the years. But yeah, so if I'm speaking to someone from Australia, we can sort of understand each other, but there's just enough to make us go, "What?" Or get really insulted at something when they die. My father's a what? Yeah, so there are certain things, dialect things that stop us from really understanding each other, but we can sort of understand. And then deaf people, I don't want to really talk about deaf people because I'm not deaf, and I feel like it should be them to talk about themselves, But from my perspective as someone who's had the privilege of being a part of this community for such a long time now, so many of them are so good at communicating, way better than those of us who can hear, where we just sit on our backsides and go, "That's fine," especially the English speakers among us who expect that around the world everyone will adapt for us, whereas deaf people walk into a situation knowing they're going to have to adapt every time, every single time. And so there's a thing called international sight, which is not technically, I think, linguistically a language, but it's used when deaf people all come together from different parts of the world, and they do regularly. A lot of deaf people love traveling because it doesn't really matter where they are, it's still going to be hard. People still going to be hearing people who are annoyingly hearing and won't watch what they're doing, and so they travel, and meeting up around the world is a big thing in the deaf community. And to watch International Sign at work is an incredible thing, to see deaf people take pieces from other people's languages and cobble together this understanding. You really see the bones of language when you watch that happen. You see the absolute fundamentals of language and communication, which are 2 different things, really. Communication happens almost with or without language. And then you see people put these bolts on and create something that allows us to talk. It's just an incredible thing to watch.
And it sounds like it. Something that just occurred to me is whenever whenever I'm talking to somebody or giving a presentation, I will absolutely, I'll change my body language, right? I think that's imperceptible to most people. We just do it, right? But I'll change the tone of my voice. I'll change the volume, right? I'll change the cadence, all of that stuff. And it just occurred to me that when you want to impart feeling as a deaf person, you probably do the exact same things with your hands, right? You maybe
Sure.
move slower or like give more emphasis to things as well to convey kind of feeling.
I mean, I couldn't answer that as a deaf person. I can answer it as someone who uses sign language. That if you were the person that I was interpreting for, right? So you were the speaker, and I was interpreting for you into BSL. If you change the cadence of your voice, if you drop your volume or you raise your volume, I'll do the same in the language. I'll carry that intention through. So again, interpreting isn't always about the words. It's very little about the words actually. It's about the intention of that primary source, that source that you are. So yeah, we are. Maybe I think that's maybe why if we loosen up, we're quite good at interpreting comedy, because we are almost chameleons. We have to be able to shift all the time, and you never really know an interpreter. You see them on stage, and you see them in presentations or whatever. You see them, but you never really know what that interpreter thinks because you're not seeing them. You're seeing the person they're interpreting for all the time. Yeah, so it's. I did a big job for Adam years and years ago, and afterwards there was a little kind of drinks soiree afterwards, and I don't normally get to do drinks soirees, so I was quite pleased with myself that I was in this. And there was a woman who was a comedy executive from some television channel, right? And she was chatting to me, and she'd just watched me on stage doing this work for Adam, this comedy work. And she was chatting to me, and she was lovely, and she was very kind and saying it was wonderful. I loved what you were doing. And I was like, yes, I am wonderful. Thank you very much. And all that. And then she said, and you're totally different to Daniel Sloss's interpreter. I saw her at Edinburgh last year, and you're totally different to her. And I had this awful moment of, I'm going to have to tell you in a second, that was me. I was Daniel Sloss as the interpreter at the Edinburgh Festival. That was me. But what you saw was him through me. And tonight what you saw was Adam through me. That's different. It's different. She just didn't understand that I was the same person that she'd seen on stage twice. She just thought it was, is
remarkable. The idea that you are such a chameleon, right? That you embody that person so drastically different, because they are. I love Daniel Sloss, like his Jigsaw special that he did on Netflix. That fundamentally changed the way I look at certain parts of life. Like he's amazing, right? And so his energy is like 180 degree different than Adam Hill, say, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So I couldn't go in with Adam's energy. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't go in with that. Adam has often talked openly, he talks openly in the past about what he wants is like a big Reiki session, a big Reiki kind of aromatherapy session. This great kind of lifting of the audience. He wants them to go out feeling lifted. Yeah. That's not what Daniel wants his audience to do. That's fundamentally different to what Daniel wants. And so I can't go in with this healing hands approach on Daniel's stage. You just can't do that. So you have to go in with Daniel's energy. I didn't think it was that different. I mean, I know it's different, but I didn't think I looked fundamentally different. But this woman could not put together what she'd seen that night and what she'd seen the year before in Edinburgh at all. It was the first time that happened to me, and it really made me look at how we do embody the person that we're interpreting for. That we really kind of, their energy and their words and their meaning and their intention live in our bodies. They live in our bones. And if that's a disturbing thing that you're doing, so if you're doing something much more delicate and difficult, like a very private thing or a disclosure of something dreadful that's happening, that still lives in your bones and in your body. And so, yeah, it's a weird profession. You can carry home other people's grief or other people's happiness or other people's anger, and you have to learn to shake that off.
So what you describe sounds a lot like method acting. I've talked to some actors, that whole idea of embodying, like becoming this entirely different person and understanding their background, their wants, their desires, like that shapes who you become in this moment. That's awesome. That's amazing.
I think there's a real connection there, and the more I do performance work, the more I see that as a feature of what we do. In fact, that's I mentioned to you before that I'm doing a PhD, and that's what's focusing. It seems to just have come to that place of it's focusing on the notion of the interpreter in a performance, embedded costumes, moving around, rehearsing, having relationships on stage with the other actors, with the other characters. But why are they on the stage? They're not on the page. They're not in the script. So why are they on that stage now? And who are they in this space? And what do they mean to the other people? What do they want from the other people? And so I had to start asking myself actors questions, which it was the last thing I expected. I genuinely did not expect that at all. But throughout the research and doing the work that I was doing, it suddenly became really clear that if I asked the actors questions, everything got easier to do, everything got better. So I started to ask, what's the dramaturgy of my position in this space, and what character am I? So I invent characters now for myself. I create characters and backstories, and I'm often a cleaner. It's really interesting. I'm often a cleaner. I think I've done 3 plays in the past year in a row where I was a cleaner in each of them. And one, I think, is because I'm in my 50s and people expect me to be a cleaner now. I think that. But also I think that cleaners, waiters, bartenders are invisible people. Do you know what I mean by that? If a waiter takes away your plate, not everybody says thank you or even notices that happens. And a waiter can sort of interrupt your personal space without it being rude, because they're doing this job, and the rules are they're allowed to do that. And so cleaners are allowed to do that as well, aren't they? They're allowed to clean the office while you're on the phone and you're doing, buy, sell, whatever. I imagine business people doing that, but that's what they do. So I find myself quite often being somebody who cleans, someone who's low level, almost invisible, but in the space. And it gives me license then to be in the space and to offer a rendition of what's happening.
Yeah. And it sounds like, too, you don't necessarily want to be the main character. Like you said, you don't want to be talking on stage. So that gives you kind of license to, like you said, just quietly be in the background performing your job. And it's okay. Yeah. I like that. Somebody described method acting to me one time. They said, it's the lie that informs the truth.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was so fascinating. Like, I invent this made up story that tells the truth of who I am in this performance. Like that always, like, somehow that like sunk into my brain. Like, that's such a fascinating concept.
That's a really good quote, actually. She says, getting a pencil out, hold on a minute. This is fodder for the PhD. I need a citation for that, Greg. I need you to send me a reference.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
They were referencing somebody else, so I could probably find the original speaker, but I have no idea.
It's an automatic PhD. Who said that? When? What page? The point is where that's all you can think.
It's all in this podcast somewhere. But you were talking about the empathetic piece, right? Like the empathy, where you see or you hear something, and you're kind of putting yourself in that person's place, right? And you're embodying that. Have you always been like really empathetic, or is it something you had to like train yourself into?
I think I always, I had a lot of hypervigilance as a young person. I come from a violent background, and so hypervigilance is kind of present. And I guess in a way, I'm sort of grateful that I was able to use it for something that was productive, and useful for me. That it meant that I was very attuned to how people sounded, and I could hear things that they were saying that they didn't actually say. In a way, that makes me sound like I'm saying I'm telepathic. I'm not, but it was certainly, I sometimes say if someone is a very difficult person, a very angry person, or a dangerous person, it's like broken glass against my skin. Sometimes I can feel it coming off them in waves. And that's hypervigilance, really. So it's a condition. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing to have. And that's waned over the years, but because of the work that I've done as an interpreter, I've built up kind of muscle of understanding what other people are saying. They're not saying it in words, but they're saying it in tone and in facial expression and the kind of the tension in their body. And if I think whether it's in performance or whether it's in community interpreting out in the community and doctor surgeries and things, if you attend to that, it makes you a better interpreter. I think me as a human being, I don't think I was always a terribly empathetic human being. You know, I think when you're hypervigilant, you're sort of drowned in feeling it's coming at you all the time. So it doesn't make you an empathetic person. Yeah, I think I've found a way through that. I try and be an empathetic person now. I try now. Yeah.
You know, so this is like kind of a spot for me. It's interesting how sometimes people will say how much they like something. Like I really enjoy that you do like this thing you do that's so awesome. And it's so funny because they don't realize that's a coping mechanism. Yeah. Because something really messed up happened to me and I had to figure out how to survive. Yeah. And now you think it's a really cool trait and attribute, and that's okay. And I appreciate that. You know, it's, but it's so, it's so funny where some of this stuff is born from, right? Like some of these, for example, I was leaving this job one time, and there's this really sweet guy, one of the kindest individuals I've ever known, Jacob, and he was telling me all these things he liked about me. Like I appreciated this and this and this, and each one of those things he said, I could immediately take back to something really traumatic in my childhood, and then the next one, yep. Yep. Oh, yep. I remember that. Why that just, it's so funny. Like all these things I liked about me were born out of the worst parts of my life. Like I remember, and it's so funny how sometimes we have useful coping mechanisms and some are less useful.
And it's a really difficult point in your life when you have to abandon the less useful ones because they worked so well when you were younger and you needed them. They were survival. And then they're not working for you anymore. You know, the self-medicating and all those kind of things, you have to let them go up to a certain extent because they're just damaging now.
I heard a doctor talking, he was talking about, he was an expert on like neurodiversity and things like that. And he was saying that whenever our brains create these coping mechanisms, they don't do the thing that's the most healthy for us. They do the thing that's the quickest and easiest for the brain to do, right? So it's, the Band-Aid or the duct tape they put on your brain isn't usually the best route, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they create, instead of these really complex kind of bridges and neural tunnels and everything that they create in the brain, instead they just go straight, that one to the A to B, get us there, survive. It's just a basic human instinct, survive, get to tomorrow. But if you're living, get to tomorrow, you can't live like that forever. That kind of chemical, just sheer chemical is overwhelming, that kind of chemistry. So yeah, it's interesting that guy appreciated them in you though. That's really interesting. Yeah, and how that felt for you. How was that for you to hear that from him?
Strange. Yeah. It was strange. Because a lot of those things I had never been super introspective on, like why I had that trait. You know, it's very seldom people actually tell you the things they like about you, right? It's just, especially, I don't know about over there, but over here, especially if you are a male, it's very uncommon and it's not encouraged to like say nice things to other males. Like for whatever reason, that's not me. Like I tell people that I love them, no matter what gender they identify as. If they are important to me in my life, I absolutely tell them. Right? Because I may not have it tomorrow, so I may not get a chance to tell them that stuff. But so like, I don't know, you just don't hear that stuff coming at you very often. And so and it was so funny, the immediacy of me understanding where that came from too, because I didn't even know that I knew that. Like a lot of those things. It's just, they were there. They weren't that far under the surface. It's really weird for me in that moment. Wasn't bad necessarily, wasn't good. It was just really strange.
There's something dislocating about somebody pointing out one of your survival traits as a good thing. It's so dislocating, and because they're very private things. You think you may not even have articulated what they are, but they're very private. They're your inner monologue. They're what's going on for you. So to have them brought out by someone else is quite a shock. Yeah.
Sometimes a little scary. It's like, this is my private thing. This is not for you to know or to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, and I know I'm bringing this back to something kind of that doesn't seem attached to it, but that's one of the reasons I think I would never stand up on stage and talk, because when I'm on stage, I'm not me. I'm never me. And actors will always say to me, but I'm never me. And I'll say, yes, I know, but you're using your voice and that's so intimate. It's such an intimate thing. And stand-up comedians will often say, well, I'm not me. But there's an element of them. There's always an element of the person, no matter what character they create or what, like Jimmy Carr's character on stage is awful. It's an awful person, but I met Jimmy Carr once and he's a lovely man.
I'm sure he's terrific. Yeah. You could tell there's genuine kindness in him, yeah.
He was genuinely kind and funny and just a nice man. I only met him very briefly, but he was a nice enough guy. I didn't think, holy, you are just horrendous the way I do with the act. I go, oh, no, you cannot say that. It's awful. I don't know if you guys see him over there, but there's a Frankie Boyle, he's quite a famous Scottish.
He's on Taskmaster this season.
Yes, right. So, you really do love your British TV. That's fantastic.
Love British TV. No doubt.
So I work for Frankie as well, and the character that you see Frankie display on stage, and you can listen to his albums, his recordings of his comedy on his website. It's just there, and that character is horrific. You know, the way he says these things. It's not even a character; it's a persona. It's a way of talking about the world. That's not who you meet when he's off stage at all. It's a different person. But there must be elements, I don't know, there must be elements of that person. You must have thought that because you wrote it down and you say it to people every night. And so I could never do that. I would find it so exposing, just so exposing to expose my inner monologue to hundreds of people. You know, nobody would come to my comedy shows. That would be like 10 people. I'm saying hundreds of people, 10 people and someone's dog. You know, that would be if I was. We would all have.
You're saying, and it's you almost have a cheat there, like you almost have a life hack, you know, because I used to be super socially awkward and quiet, and I hated crowds and just crushing anxiety, and it's different now. I love to perform. I love to be in front of a crowd of people and then move them one direction or the other. I don't know, it feels really special, you know, to like have a feeling inside me, and I can use my words to convey that, right? But I've learned that's the only tool at my disposal to do that is my voice.
Yeah.
And that's not the case for you. You have other tools. You have sign language. Like you can actually convey that message in other methods other than your voice. I mean, I know like writers can do the same thing with their writing. I'm not talented in that respect. And filmmakers can make me cry, you know, things like that. Like they can do it, but this is it's the only tool I have, right? But you have more.
There's that and your body. Those are the two things that you use to communicate and to affect people. And this is the difference between the job I do, which is based in interpreting, and the job that deaf actors do. They have sign language and their body to communicate. So it looks on the surface as if we're both doing the same thing, but we're really not. You know, we're not at all. I'm hiding. You know, I'm hiding behind someone else's words. I'm hiding behind another performer on a stage, essentially, and I'm masking with sign language. So in a way, I've always said this: I'm nowhere near as brave as deaf actors or deaf stand-up comedians or anybody at all who does this, who does it in sign language, because they are using their words, their language to offer these things to the world. In a way, I'm sort of cowardly. You know, I'm going, it's not me, it's him. He said that. I just told you what he said. You know, in a way,
I would argue that almost every single actor is acting somebody else's script, something somebody else created, and they're bringing it to life with their body. How is that any different than you're taking their script and you're embodying that piece of art? You're bringing it to life for somebody else.
Yeah, that's the argument I always get from actors whenever I say that. They say, "Well, you're not. You're hiding. You've got a script." And I say, "But it's a script. It's twice removed. You've got a script and then a character that you create. I'm working with your character, so I'm twice removed. So I'm kind of a little bit," and they never accept it. You guys, you actors, you never accept it. You always say, "No,
I am not an actor. Do not ever accuse me of being an actor.
Sorry.
I have no talent in that respect. I would love to. I would love to be counted amongst talented people. I am not. When I say perform, I'm talking about like I've officiated weddings or spoken to big crowds of people for stuff. Let's just say that I am that kind of talent. I am absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't want to steal valor. Oh my goodness. But
you're an actor. And I go, I'm not an actor. I'm not an actor. It's exactly the same. My body language is the same and everything. The hand goes up. No, I'm not an actor.
Well, it's just, I've had real conversations with real actors that earn their living from it. It almost feels gross for me to like try and put myself in that place because they work so hard to earn that. Oh my God, I'm making your argument. Stop.
No, exactly.
How are you doing this voodoo magic?
They get paid so little. It's awful. Awful. You maybe earn a year's salary. If they're lucky, they get a year's salary, but it's so awful. The terrible pay. It's awful. I don't know how that has survived in the 21st century. Really don't. For what they give us, when the pandemic struck and we all went into lockdown, we all turned to the arts. We consumed TV and movies and music. We went back to books. We turned to writers and artists and painters and actors and directors and editors. We turned to them to get us through, Wow. But, when they're just not paid, it's just incredible. And then you guys have got the big writers' strike again, haven't you?
Yeah, that's going on right now, yeah.
And I remember when that happened the first time round. Well, the last time round, not the first time, but the last time round. Yeah, because the West Wing was the big show at the time, and I remember the West Wing was just stopped because there were no writers. I thought, wow, everything stops. Those are the guys that hold all the power. They really do.
Yeah. Well, I remember late night television, it pretty much all shut down except for Conan O'Brien. Like, he was the only one that kind of won. And like the big thing was he would spin his wedding ring and they would time it. You remember that? Yeah.
No,
oh my
I saw that the other day, and it was like focused on this wedding ring. That's what we're just do with our writers.
Yeah, I feel like that was a snapshot into everybody's home during the pandemic. It's like we're all doing these crazy things to try and occupy our times.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But, you were talking about like the escape and stuff like that. That's absolutely, like, I was already a big British TV fan, but during the pandemic, it became this secret portal for my wife and I to be transported out of this situation. I was telling people like, after a few months of it, I was like, I'm starting to actually like my kids. I think I've got Stockholm syndrome. It's like, I felt trapped in here with these people and I needed to get out, before I screamed in a pillow.
What did you watch? What did you watch? What was your lockdown? What were your lockdown?
My gosh. Everything. But I've been watching British television for a long time. So I like a lot of stuff like, every American loves the Great British Bake Off because it's such a delightful show where all these kind people are helping each other out.
Yeah.
I love Taskmaster. To me, that's my absolute favorite all-time British television show. But then you've got old good ones like Green Wing or Black Books or
Green Wing. I don't. Anybody else who's ever watched Green Wing, and I loved Green Wing.
Green Wing was amazing.
It was. And Black Books. Just astonishing, just brilliant. I loved it.
You got Phone Shop. You've got In-Betweeners. You've got Friday Night Dinner. That was a really fun one.
You really know your British TV.
I've watched a ton. And then you've got The Cleaner, the Greg Davies, Man Down.
Good tell. I'd never met him, but I really love him. I think he's wonderful. I really do. It makes me laugh as soon as he starts to talk. I start to laugh.
I've seen like a couple of his most recent stand-up stuff. He's amazing. Like I bet that would be a fun gig to kick around with that monster of a man.
That would be. There are some people that I've been asked to do and I've said no, because I either really like their work, really, really like their work, and I don't want to meet them in case they're arseholes. That's just so disappointing,
I like it. That to me that says, Adam, you were like, don't really care for that guy.
No. I didn't. There used to be an advert on British TV that had it was a paid, I think it was for shades, and shades. I said there's a little callback there, and I think the advert used to say something like, it does what it says on the tin, and it said something like shade paint or something like that. I can't remember. So Adam he does what it says on the tin. That's Adam. Who you see on stage is pretty much Adam all the time. It's that giant Reiki session. He's a lovely human being, and he's sort of the kindest man in show business. I love it. He is that guy. I haven't really met, the comedians I work for, well, because I've worked for a lot of them, like Daniel Sloss and Craig Hill is a Scottish comedian who I work for, Frankie Boyle, Jim Owen is an Irish comedian, but who lives in Australia, so he travels a lot. He's really good. If you've not seen Jim Owen, take a look at his work. He's great. He's very funny, very visual, very different to, for example, Adam, who's got a lot of words going on. He's very, he paints pictures with these words, and Jim Owen sort of paints pictures with very few words and a little movement of the body, and it's just, so a lot of the time my work for him is just trying to do as little as possible so that I'm not the focus. It's kind of going like, turning to look at him so that everyone turns to look at him, But these are guys that I've worked for years and years and years. And so I built up relationships with them, and I know them well, and we look forward to seeing each other. And we're not friends because we don't see each other every day, but we're maybe close showbiz pals. There you go. We'll say that. Close showbiz pals. But they're lovely people. But sometimes the other reason I sometimes turn down work is because I might turn down work because I don't like the comedy, and I know I can't do it justice then if I can't put my heart and soul into it. I might find it sort of contrary to my views, my political views. So there's racism in it or sexism in it. I'm not interested in that at all. Someone else can do that, and I'll signpost people on to other interpreters who can do that, because people have the right to see that and make up their own mind. I'm not a gatekeeper. But sometimes I say no to a job because I like the work too much and I laugh too much, and then it just becomes about me laughing on stage, and that's useless. That's just useless.
You get too distracted.
Yes, yeah. Whereas, I like all the comedians I work with. I like all their work, but I can contain it. I can go and see it and get all my laughter out, and then I can go and work it, and I can contain my sort of mirth, my reaction to it. There's a comedian called Jason Byrne from Ireland, who's a really good friend of Adam's, and I can work for Jason. I've only done a couple of little charity things that he's been in. Thank God, because as soon as he starts, I just can't stop laughing. And the last time was years ago when I had to stop and get a colleague to take over because I was just laughing too hard. And then Adam got annoyed because he's like, you never laugh like that on stage with me. I know, that's because I'm contained, but Jason, I can't contain it. It's just ridiculously funny, so I can't contain it with Jason Brown. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's awesome that you're also kind of giving shit to the comedians you work with. I love that.
No, I don't give shit. Daniel Sloss, I first worked for Daniel, I think he was 21. And I remember the following year he said in his Edinburgh Festival show, he said, I'm 22, I feel like because he started when he was like 16 or something like that. He started stand up really young. And he said, so I'm 22 now, and I really feel like, I have to be more mature. I should be more mature than I am. And I was on stage with him thinking, working and thinking, I'm 44. I am literally double this man's age. At that point in my life, I was double his age. I can't do this for much longer. No, I can't be on stage with this boy much longer, And every year I say to his agent, do you not think we should find him someone younger? And every year she goes back going, no, Daniel doesn't want anyone younger. He wants you. Well, it's very nice, but at some point I'm going to have to stop. I'm 53 now. At some point, I'm going to have to stop being on stage with him because it just looks stupid.
I don't know about that, but Daniel, for sure, like something that has struck me multiple times watching his comedy is how is he so good and so young simultaneously? It's like, in some of the insights he's come to, it's like you shouldn't have developed that kind of world knowledge, that kind of wisdom. At the age of like 24, 25, or whenever he made this special, it's like it should not come to somebody so young.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. He's a good guy, and he's a really interesting guy. And I think I've heard him credit his mum and his dad as the people who kind of kept that expanse opened for him. And if you've seen I think one of his specials talks about his sister who died.
I don't know.
And I think that kind of early. We just talked about this early sort of trauma in your life. It changes who you are. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes your body chemistry. It changes the way you interact with the world and how you see people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've always wondered, if that plus the fact that his mum and dad are lovely people and super bright. And so I wondered if it's that combination. And he's just a really cool guy as well. My daughter's about to turn 15. She's never met Daniel and she's never seen him live, but she talks like Daniel. And it just kind of freaks me out. She does these bits and I swear it's like she's channeling Daniel Sloss, and it does freak me out when she does it. As you sound like, and I know what Daniel Sloss says, and I do not want that coming out of my 15-year-old's mouth. What yet, and not in my hearing, you know.
There's worse people to emulate, I think, out there, for sure. But
Yeah.
you know what's funny is I love his comedy, and he has a podcast, and I've tried listening to it. It's him and another fella, and you guys are Scottish. I can understand you. His partner on this, it is like talking with a mouthful of marbles. I cannot understand a word this guy says.
And it might be his closest friend, and the person who often is a support act for him is Kai Humphries. He's from Newcastle in the north of England, and that's a very different accent. And Daniel has a lovely Scottish accent, a really lovely, slightly more East Coast, it's a lovely accent. Kai Humphries has a very strong Newcastle accent, and I struggle sometimes to understand Newcastle accents. So might be, it possibly is. If he's got a podcast, I would go out on a limb and say it's probably Kai. Yeah. So
it's been like a couple of years since I've tried to listen to it. I gave like 2 episodes of trying to, and I watched a ton of British TV, right? So I'm hearing all these various accents, so my brain is pretty attuned. But this one, it wasn't happening. I was like, this is too much of a struggle. Like,
it's funny. You don't hear the Newcastle accent on TV very often. It's just not. Yeah, you don't really hear it much. So,
I've heard it a few times on first dates. So, because they get people from kind of all over. And there was one episode where they had 2 people from Newcastle, and it was just, okay, come on, hang on a second.
Subtitles.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, woof. Come on.
Yeah.
So fun. So fun.
So fun. It's interesting that you like Daniel. It feels so weird to me because he's so Scottish to me. You know, and I know he's really done well in America. His Netflix specials are doing well as well, and I know that. But that's sort of divorced because I don't see that part of him. You know, I only see him when he hits the Edinburgh Festival. It's really strange. It's nice. It's nice to get fans out there.
Well, for me, I'm really attracted to people who have different thought processes or insightful takes on something maybe I haven't been exposed to. Or honestly, I want to talk to people that are so different from me that, you know, like that, like it's absolutely foreign. So I've talked to a guy from Sweden, and his English was pretty good, but there was a little bit of a language barrier. So I started shying away from that because, you know, it's you know, I'm American, which means there is one universal language. If you don't speak it, you know, that's not my problem. So yeah, I wish I was better with other languages. I'm just not. Again,
part of my work early on, before I sort of specialised in performance, I did a lot of conference work, and I had the great good fortune and privilege to travel a little bit around Europe, and I set South Africa once, which was incredible. Montreal once, which was amazing for me as well. But it was the week before the comedy festival, which I just thought was terrible timing. I was there for a week before the comedy festival. That just seemed like the gods were looking down and going, ha 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 ha, no, you're not going to get to see it. It's a festival I've always wanted to go to, is the Montreal Comedy Festival. And weirdly, the Coquet Comedy Festival in Ireland, I've always wanted to go to as well. And it's just over the water. It should be easy to go to, but it's always at the same time as my daughter's birthday or something happens, and I'm like, I can't go. I should have been see it. So because I was able to travel a little bit, I got more used to hearing people who use English as a second or third language. And I'm fine with most people, like Swedes and Finns, Norwegians, Danes. They all have really good English, the ones I've met anyway at conferences and stuff. And you can tune in after a while and go, oh, that's what that means for them. That's the way they articulate that. That's okay. The one country that I really struggle with in terms of their English is Italians. I can't understand Italian inflected English from an Italian. I don't know why I can't. And I sort of throw up my hands and pass it on to someone else because I can't do it. I get about 3 words in and go, I have no idea what they said. It's just... And I love Italian. I don't speak Italian, but I love Italian as a language, but I can't get it when they speak English. I don't know. Must be something to do with the teaching, the way it's taught in the country or something. I don't know. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's fun. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I've talked to a couple of Italians, and he wasn't
The last one I talked to wasn't too bad. He spoke slowly, so it made it a little bit easier for me, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe he was taking his time so that, he was kind of doing the interpretation in his brain. So
maybe when you do
Maybe.
conferences, the presenters come up and they're nervous, and sometimes they're reading from their script, they're reading from their paper, and they just start, and it's like a speeding bullet. All this language comes out, and quite often you just find yourself sitting there going, what? Let me go. I got the title, and then that's done, or they do this thing, presenters will come up and say, well, you wanted to see my presentation before I did it, because you really need to see these things so that you can translate them and try and remember it, so forth, so that you're prepared. And they come up and they hand you a piece of paper as they walk onto the podium to present, and you go, not useful, not useful, not useful.
That makes me think of when you're watching a show and then you have closed captions and just in quotes it says unintelligible noise. It's like,
yes, I think that's my people. Well done. Yes. I often have to say, I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what it was. Sorry. What was the story? I've got no idea what they said. Yeah. A lot of apologising when you're an interpreter. You should apologise a lot, I think.
you guys just don't have a general like, ooh.
Yeah, that should be our little emoji, I should mean interpret. I use that emoji for neurologists because I said before I have MS, and you ask neurologists what it is, how it happens, why does a relapse happen, where does it come from, and they go, I sort of feel sorry for them because they spend their whole life studying one organ, one part of the body, and they know about 5% of what it can do. You can't really predict what it will do. And it's the strangest thing to do. The strangest job, I think, neurology. And gynecology, that's a weird job as well.
Hey, a job is a job,
Top and tail.
Top and tail. Oh my gosh. They put their boots on just like everybody else, their gloves. You know what I heard somebody say the other day? Why is it that my gynecologist goes out of the room while I change this paper gown and then stares directly into my cervix 2 seconds later? Why even leave the room? Why not just wait?
Just wait. It's fine. It's okay. Yeah. It's cool. And there was a comedian years and years ago, and she was an American woman, and this is from my teenage years. This is from when I was when I discovered comedy when I was 15 or 16, and I discovered that stand-up could say things that you couldn't say ordinarily in public. It was usually said in a little room where people would go hee 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 and they would laugh at other people, but you wouldn't say that in public. And suddenly stand-up did that. They were kind of mid-80s I discovered that. And there was a woman, an American woman, and I wish I knew her name because I always kind of cite people because you shouldn't tell people's jokes. But I remember her saying, the hardest gig in the world must be being married to a gynecologist. Because he comes home and you're like, hello, and he goes, oh, if I see another one. That joke, I heard that joke in 1984, and I still think it's funny. I still think it's
That's one of those ones that holds up for sure.
Yeah. Nothing changed.
I was stalking you a little bit, light stalking, obviously, on the internet, and
I hardly do the thing.
I noticed, on Twitter, you're somewhat active on there, but I noticed you did a lot of advocacy stuff on there, and I didn't realize you had MS, and you don't necessarily scream that to the world. I have MS.
No. Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Advocacy stuff. I think amplifying other people's voices, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it.
No one really needs to hear my voice any more than they do, but I think there are lots of voices that get lost, and we need to amplify those. It's the only thing I can do, isn't it? I'm filled with all these hangovers from a 1970s and 80s upbringing. I'm filled with all these layers of isms, prejudices that I don't even know are there half the time. And so if I can do that a little bit, then that helps. That's all I can do. Just try that.
Why do you feel like nobody needs to hear your voice?
I'm doing okay. You know what I mean? People hear me when I want them to hear me. Sometimes as a woman, it's harder to be heard. And as a woman in her 50s, it's harder to be heard. You become more invisible in your 50s. And so I've learned to be probably a bit louder than I used to be, a bit more insistent than I used to be. I was just talking about this with my husband the other day there. We come from a very working class background. I know it's slightly different in America, the way you talk about class, but we both grew up pretty poor, with very little in terms of life chances. Just kind of school, job, husband, children, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're lucky, you might have a house you can stay in for the rest of your life. If you're not, you may have to move around a little bit to find a house you can afford. The most extraordinary thing when I was growing up was if you bought a house, that was an extraordinary thing to do. You could buy a house. So we've worked very hard, but we've been incredibly lucky in that neither of us really are spenders. We're not particularly material people. And so we've managed to find ourselves now, particularly during the pandemic. I was really grateful for it. You probably understand this better than most, that I was in a safe house. It wasn't a violent home. I was in a safe place.
Yeah.
I had a profession that could go online and I could work. Still bringing income. My husband had a contracted job, so his contract still paid him throughout that time. And his job went online. He's a teacher, so his job went online. We have one gorgeous daughter who's just the coolest, and so who doesn't particularly like school. She loves learning, but not particularly school. So she was over the moon to just have books all around about her and just want to learn by herself. And that's kind of the home she's been brought up in. She thinks that's the way everybody lives. That with dad, everybody's dad sits down and reads Shakespeare in order to teach it the next day. Everybody's mum could have to go and do some writing for the PhD. That's not the way it is. That's not how I grew up. So yeah, I was very lucky. I can't remember why I started telling you that. I'm so sorry. Why did I start telling you that? So you forgot. Oh, no.
No. It's I was asking you why you feel like you don't need to be heard.
So we were talking about the fact that we now live in a really lovely area in Scotland. It's called a leafy suburb of Glasgow, an affluent leafy suburb of Glasgow.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah, it's fancy, and it took me years to really feel settled here because I'm such a different class to the people around about me. But my kid is of this class. She doesn't remember anything but this. And we were talking about how the further up the classes you go, the more oxygen you use in a space, and how we were taught, without words, we were told, don't take up the space, and that's doubled for women. And I now know that that's doubled for Black people and people of colour and women of colour and Black women. It's doubled, tripled, quadrupled for them. Don't take up the space. And so I learned very early on as a woman not to use up the oxygen in the room. That was other people's. Sure. Even just before the pandemic, I found myself in a number of situations and it began to ring in my consciousness that I was invisible. Because interpreters, quite often, we used to be told to be invisible, which is nonsense. You can't be invisible. You're a human being in space. And the research is proving all of that. But we were taught initially that, you don't have an opinion, you don't have any feelings, you're just there, do your job and leave, that's it. But of course you have opinions and of course you have feelings and you react to what's happening in the space. So you have to be open to that and acknowledge it, not in the middle of the job. I just like to share with you all, you don't want to do that, but for just your own mental health, you need to be able to do that. And so I was just talking about, I want my daughter to know that she can take up space, that she's valuable enough to, the oxygen in the room belongs to her as well. I don't want her to be like some of the people I've met who are very middle class and who just suck up all the oxygen and don't notice that they're doing it. It's just presumption. There's a presumptive, this space is mine. I want her to be balanced. And so I figured I better be balanced then, because that's how you model it, isn't it? So I started to take up a bit more room than I used to. But yeah.
That's cool.
Trying it.
Do you like the way it feels? Like once you start spreading out a little bit?
It's quite scary. This is actually one of my ways of taking up a bit more oxygen, a bit more space, because, I don't really talk publicly about the job. Not really. And I think there's a really uneasy balance between being an interpreter for around and with a community who are marginalised and minoritized, but not being marginalised and minoritized myself, As a hearing person, I have all this privilege that deaf people don't have. And so it's almost 30 years that I've done this job, from sort of the start of it to now. And I've slowly learned that the best ally I can be is to get out of the way and just amplify, just to do the job, get out of the way and amplify them. And I'm trying to do that more and more. But it's a very difficult balance. And when you work in performance, when it's all about marketing and advertising and publicity and being seen and a spotlight. And so there's that really delicate balance to be struck between offering information so that people who want to come and see that show because they use sign language, they want to come and see that comedian, or they want to come and see that play or that dance piece or whatever. And they know that you're there, and maybe they know that they think you're quite good. I want to see you do this, but not then being the one who leads the parade, It's a very delicate balance of constantly. And I used to worry that I was so uncertain all the time. I was always uncertain about, should I do this? Is that right? Right, maybe I shouldn't do that. And I would get quite muddled in that. And then I read a little quote from somebody, can't remember who, somewhere, that said, the people who are uncertain are the people who are genuinely engaging with living. I thought, that's true, actually. I thank God, because I was starting to think I was sort of a bit broken. But I think my uncertainty actually helps me, not finding myself at the front of the parade saying, come with me, guys, And then, being diagnosed with MS a few years ago, I work with a lot of disabled performers, people who are disabled dancers, disabled actors, directors, and I've worked with people who have disabilities for years and years, activists, and there's there's some brilliant people in there, there's some assholes in there, there are some, everywhere, like human beings. But having chatted to some of the people that I've worked with closely and, telling them about the diagnosis and saying it's really freaky, because now technically I'm disabled. And that's kind of freaking me out, because I know how hard disabled people work to live equally in society. I don't feel like I can say I'm disabled because I'm not disabled by society. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'm not. I have a condition that disables me sometimes, but society doesn't necessarily disable me yet. Not yet. I'm very lucky, touching wood, and not yet with my condition. But they said, "Come on in. The water's fine. It's fine. Join us." I just worry that it's very easy when you have someone who can hear and walk and see and talk. They tick a lot of boxes if they're disabled. It's very easy then to marginalise the people who don't hear and don't talk and don't see and don't walk. It's easy to marginalise all those people if someone else can say it for them. So I'm just really reluctant to talk about it as a disabled person. Does that make? I don't know. I'm still finding my way.
Makes sense.
I'm still finding my way through it all. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely understand, especially with as much time as you spend in that community. I could see how, you would kind of measure yourself against that. It's like, I don't have this disadvantage or that one or that one. And I could see why you could use that to kind of, what is that, like confirmation bias? Like those things as a child, like I don't need to take up space. This further confirms, I don't need to take up this space.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking for it, you'll find it, right?
Yeah, and that's been quite tricky as well. So if I'm trying to take up more space as a woman in my 50s and take that power, but also not stand in front of people and not be the ally that pushes them out of the way. And so it's a little bit of a delicate balance at the moment. When you get a diagnosis like that, it does change your life. It has to. Not initially. Initially, you're just going, I'm fine, or what the hell? You don't know what's happened. But after a couple of years, it starts to sink in what's going on. And MS sucks. Oh, it really sucks. And I'm lucky because I'm still okay at the moment, but MS sucks. So shout out to everybody out there who is living with it. They call themselves MS warriors. I quite like that, yeah. I'm not a warrior yet, but yeah, I'm here. I'm still standing.
Should I take a little more space? All right, well, I have a quote for you because you apparently be a big fan of quotes, and then I have a thought. So one that was important to me to hear at one point in my life was, I believe it was Bertrand Russell said, "The whole problem with the world today is that fools and fanatics are so sure of themselves and wiser people are so full of doubts."
Yeah.
And I thought, man, isn't that the truth? Because it's like I've always seen people that are so loud and boisterous and exerting their opinion, and they're complete morons. They're absolutely wrong, And then I see like this quiet guy over here that absolutely brilliant. is going to fix all the problems that this guy creates. I was just waiting for him to get done talking so he can go and fix everything quietly. It's just, I don't know, that kind of, like, gave me maybe permission to not be so uncertain about myself.
Yeah.
But then a thought I have is, talking about, that amplifying is important. I think it's an awesome message, and I think what you do is important for a lot of us. But I think when people, if they don't hear you, they aren't gonna need that, or they aren't gonna get that message. So it's like, I contacted you out of the blue, and you said yes, much to your chagrin at this point, I'm sure. But you,
well, that was my surprise. I said yes.
No, you are so kind. You're so patient. You're such an amazing listener. And then you start slowly kind of weaving in like these really important things for people to hear about how it's our job to amplify others, right? And this amazing message of taking up space that you do deserve to be here. Like, we don't necessarily have the class system here in America. And I am a cis white male, so taking up space has never been a problem for me, right? Or having my voice heard and all that crap. But for me, it is so fundamentally important for me to be a better human, to hear those perspectives from people. And it's people like you that have to speak up, because if you don't, how are we gonna hear it? How are we gonna know?
Yeah, I can't take credit for the amplifying idea. That I read so much over the pandemic. That gave me such a space to stop, and I don't know how anyone could have come out of the lockdowns unchanged by what we saw on our TVs in the protests, the marches, the Black Lives Matter protests, the things that were happening. I don't know how anybody has walked away from that unchanged. I genuinely don't.
It's because you didn't live in Florida in the United States. Like, I don't know if you realize, but COVID never happened in the south of the U.S.
Yeah.
So
wow.
There you go. We were amazingly unaffected. So a lot of us can stick our head in the sand.
I guess it's what you watch, isn't it? It's what you choose to put on your TV and what you choose to read. If in Britain you're choosing to read the Daily Mail, which is just a rag filled with coronation memorabilia, and there are no working classes unless they are the undeserving poor. We're back to almost a 19th century kind of concept of there's the undeserving poor, and then there's a deserving poor who are lovely and tolerant and patient and kind. Thank you very much. I'll take anything you can give me. But the undeserving are the ones who want and need and are active. But they're the ones who gave us the Labour Party. They're the ones who gave us the cooperative movement. They gave us terms and conditions and contracts and holiday pay and maternity pay and sick pay and all those things. They came from that active, and those people are being pilloried again. And And I think to see what was happening for you guys, but we had it here as well. We have a really prominent case of very similar to George Floyd in Scotland, and I think Scotland has to face our responsibility. It's very easy to say we didn't profit from, for example, slavery and all those kind of things, but we absolutely did. Even the working classes, even the impoverished ancestors that I have, who came over from Ireland to Scotland back in the late 19th century, we profited in that we had a job in these factories that took the cotton and made clothing from it. We didn't profit that much, but we profited. So there's a lot of sort of stuff to work out, and it gets all mixed up in my head, and I get anxious. So it's nice to know that you saw that I was amplifying, because I'm really trying.
Absolutely. All right, Catherine, I could literally talk to you for the rest of the day. I could occupy all of your time, but we are getting dangerously close to our time. So I want to first thank you. To me, time is an absolute gift, right? It's like the one thing that we can truly give to other people. So I super appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely. It's been good to be me. It's been
open and honest.
Yeah.
I love it. So right here at the end, I always like to ask, is there anything you'd like to promote? Anything you've got going? Any direction you'd like to point people maybe towards your social media or any of that stuff? Like if you want to interact with people. Some people have said, don't contact me. That's totally cool. But if you want people to interact, how would you have them do that?
I'm not that bothered. I'm on Twitter. I'm there. You can put that handle up if you want. I would say if there's anybody listening who has never worked with a deaf person or a deaf performer, hire somebody, because especially if you're working in a big organisation and you're trying to look at diversity and you're trying to work out how how to be more open and accessible and just right, just right with the world. Talk to deaf people, talk to Black deaf people, people of colour who are also deaf. Talk to them. Get sign language people, sign language using people into your organisations. You will not regret it at all. You will not regret it. That's the only thing to say.
I love it. You had to leave on a kind note, didn't you?
That's not kindness. That's just fact. It's just fact. It's just.
Spit it how you will, Catherine. Spit it how you will. All right. Let me hit stop on all this stuff.